We're back, episode 16. It's a special day today.
Very special day.
Yeah.
It is Leonidas' 22nd birthday.
Yes, it's my 22nd name day. Any of you Game of Thrones fans out there, I am turning a year older. I had a conversation with my parents last night. It was probably the funniest thing because, you know, your parents are just usually very happy for your birthday. And she says, my mom says, "This is the last year you're going to be 30.
Wow.
I was like, thank you. Yes, it's true. But yeah, I mean, another year older. I'm very happy that I'm healthy and I don't feel too crazily older. But you and I were having discussions about some things the other day that we were like, Jesus.
Sleep.
Sleep and teas.
Sleep and tea. Different type of teas.
Yeah.
Sleep. And it was kind of at the end of the conversation, Lee was like, wow, what are we talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was like, this is crazy.
Sleep and tea, and if we don't go to sleep, it's anyhow. Yeah, 39
funny.
is cool. It's a year before 40. You're right.
It's the year before 40.
So it's somewhat. It seems uneventful. The 40 definitely does not. You know, I recently turned 40, and definitely. You know, a lot of reflection on 4 decades, and yeah, I don't necessarily feel 40, but I guess the days I do feel 40.
Yeah, I get when we were having that conversation, I was just reflecting because I was getting excited for a tea that you were telling me about. And I was like, who the fuck gets excited for a tea? Like, that's going to help me sleep better. And then I started giving you advice about the teas that I like. And I was like, this tea is the best because after I drink it, I digest my food a little easier and then I can sleep better. I'm like, Jesus Christ. And then I was talking about the night routine. Like, all right, we can go to bed by like 10:30 at the latest.
Ironically, last week was not a good sleep week for me.
Yeah.
But, you know, these are the little details that will make it game, you know, change the game in terms of your performance, whether it's your job, your career as a physical therapist, a trainer, and or whatever kind of training you're doing. Mm-hmm. As we know, we discussed at length, I think, last podcast about the importance of sleep.
Yeah.
Lee and I, again, highlighting Joe Rogan's podcast, but he had a great, he had someone on there on sleep. I don't remember the guy's name, but
It'll be in the show notes again.
Yeah, that's where that research is. Joe Rogan podcast on each show note. But it was a game changer. I have shared it with a lot of clients, and they were very appreciative. And it's eye-opening and also scary, the importance of sleep. But back to the opening on age.
Yeah, I do feel the most apparent thing. Like, I ask myself, okay, I don't necessarily feel older all the time. I don't necessarily, like, when I look in the mirror, I'm not like, holy shit, I got gray hair and stuff, but I don't feel like it's terrible, which is okay. I guess that's the biggest thing. The sleep is one of the biggest things I've noticed since I've gotten older. It's become way more, the last couple of weeks, I had some of my family visit, which was incredible. We just did lots of activities. I got a lot less sleep. And then, as we spoke about last time, I took a course. So all those things caught all in once. I was getting not a lot of sleep over the course of 2 or 3 days. And rewind back to when I was in my 20s, I could do that probably for a week or maybe a couple weeks, maybe consecutive weekends in a row, and not be affected to the extent that I was affected this time. After just 2 days, I was like, if you guys follow me on social media, I posted the first night that I got like sufficient sleep, and I slept 11 and a half hours straight on my according to my sleep app. And I got a lot of funny feedback from that. Everyone's like, I wish I could sleep like that. Or
oh man, well,
not in a negative way.
It's probably all the parents out there, because when you hear 11,
that's what they were trying to say.
Yeah,
is
the
like,
parents. I mean, I was told once, it was like an ominous thing where I shared with a coworker that I was like, "Oh, what'd you do?" I was like, "Oh, I rested well over the weekend," and she looked at me and she was like, get it in now.
Yeah.
Because when you have a kid, you're not. And I looked at her. I was like, wow, she seems like she's exaggerating, but she was right. Because
Spot on.
my poor sleep wasn't unfortunately any of my doing last week. It was my little guy decided to recite every word he knew at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh my God.
But definitely, as we age, sleep I think makes a big difference.
It's really important. Oh, it's cool. So a lot of other things when you get older, I feel like, and maybe you can expand on this too, but you're not as like, at least I find this at work. Maybe it's because I'm more comfortable there with the people I'm around, but you don't really, you're a little bit more transparent.
Much. Yeah. There's definitely less filters, I guess. And it's not that you're try to exert your will around your environment. I think it's just like you said, you're a lot more at ease with
Right.
certain things.
Exactly. The more time you are in an environment, you can feel better. So we wanted to cover a couple of topics today. This was at the request of, we have a Facebook group for people to contribute topics. So if you don't follow us on Facebook, give us a follow, and then also join the podcast topics group. So a colleague of ours, Dr. Jordan Seda, he was suggesting some topics, and so we wanted to follow up on that. In addition to talking about some other things. So today we're going to be discussing movement practices and popular modalities that are out both in the fitness world and in the PT world. And this is somewhat different from what we talked about a couple episodes ago, where we were talking about the I can't remember the name of it now, like the squat master or the
Things that belong in a museum.
yes, the museum, yeah.
The museum. This will be a little different. I think we're highlighting different or common, I would say, practices / techniques.
Right.
One would consider becoming proficient at, right? I mean, and we've definitely witnessed a lot of these techniques either on ourselves or with our colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And just going to give you a brief overview. And I think when Lee and I were discussing this podcast, we were thinking of, how do we tease out some of the best practices within physical therapy realm and in the fitness realm as well. Like how do we tease those positive qualities out to kind of combine them both?
Yeah. And so one of the I think one of the main topics to discuss is you see a lot of tools now. So in the physical therapy world, when you might go get treatment, you might have heard of Graston, instrument-assisted soft tissue massage, even not even tool-assisted massage, ART, which stands for active release technique, things like that. So these are things that are out in our field, and maybe just to talk a little bit about each one of them and what they mean and what our experience is with it. I first wanted to go over some of the prices for it because I feel like that's a big deal.
Graston is very expensive.
Yeah.
As I'm looking over here at Lee's research, she researched it very well. It will be on the show notes. No. The Graston, so 3-piece tool from the Graston camp.
Yeah.
Cost about $1,200 for 3 pieces, and then if you want a 6-piece chicken McNuggets, it'll be $2,200, $2,300 for these 6 pieces. I'm rounding up by a few dollars.
Yeah.
So then the courses, $650 for a 12-hour course, and then $695 for a 14-hour course. And I don't even know what a smart tool course is.
So that's different. So that's a different
not
company.
Graston. Yes, that's not Graston. That's the little square piece, I believe.
I think that's square. Yeah, you stick your hand in it, and it has like a rounded end.
Yes,
and
it looks like a brass knuckle kind of thing.
Exactly.
Got it.
And the prices are. I mean, just for I was searching for the price on one. You can't just get one. So that was the minimum that you could get. So that's pretty crazy. So at least for the Graston, 3 pieces, $11.95. That's a really large investment for a clinician or anybody who wants to use it. I've seen trainers use things like this too, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they're making it out of to make it cost that much, but you could probably fashion something together for like $20 or
I'm sure. I mean, from what I've seen, the few practitioners that I've seen use it, they definitely have an assortment of tools. And I guess the benefit with any of these tool-assisted releasing is to try to save one's hands.
Yeah.
I think the popularity of this has probably increased with the increased workload on average we see in the industry.
Yes.
So one, if anybody's listening here that works in a high volume clinic, you can understand how tiring it is to be constantly working with your hands. So I think that this is probably sprouted out of that. The popularity probably has increased because of that.
Right. Now, there's one thing we wanted to touch upon is the rationale and the basic principles for these tools. Though they're a little outdated, and it's now coming to light a little more. If you follow accounts on social media like Clinical Athlete, and maybe if you follow myself, I've posted about this. They've posted a lot about it. There's the Clinical Athlete podcast. They did a whole podcast on evaluating the research on foam rolling and what that means in terms of breaking down fascia and things like that.
Adhesions.
Adhesions.
What is it? What is help me out here. What is the general score? Because I've kind of strayed away from it only because I don't feel, one, the compliance is relatively low, like last session we discussed that, and I find it to be relatively ritualistic. So people are mindlessly doing it.
Right.
So in my head, why I would kind of prescribe it is to release, to help relieve some pressure from an area to, I don't know my rationale. After the last couple of years, I'm questioning my rationale. But let's just say in a runner with some kind of ITB syndrome, whatever that means to the public. So they kind of foam roll the vastus lateralis, your IT band. But what is the current research on it?
The current research, they don't know exactly what it's doing, but there's hypothesis. So one thing that they are now saying the likelihood of it doing this is low, which is the breakup of adhesions, loosen up fascia, things like that, especially for the IT band, only because, or I would say mainly, not only, but mainly because cadaver studies on the IT band have shown that there's no way in hell you can put enough pressure on the IT band to break up the actual connections and the fascia and the adhesions, as some say, and the reason why they know that. Are you on the mode of airplanes?
I'm on the airplanes.
Oh, okay.
I'm in the air. I'm in the air.
But they've like there's this famous video. I might be able to find it for the show notes, but I doubt it. In Europe, I want to say either it's a bunch of Germans or something like that. They were scientists who took an IT band out of a cadaver, separated it. They attached from a tree to a Volkswagen, and they hung the Volkswagen. So, and it just stayed there. They were trying to show they're trying to demonstrate how thick this thing is, and there's no way in hell that you're going to produce enough force to break up anything with it. And that was a cadaver's IT band, which most likely is an older individual and weaker and things like that. Right. So the theory now is when you do things like this, you're stimulating the nervous system. So I think all manual therapy and this kind of stuff, it's if you wanted to put it in category or a theme, it's negotiating with the nervous system. You're sitting there saying like, all right, you have a certain predetermined length and tension, and that's dictated by many things, one of which is the nervous system. And so by adding these things on, you're starting to negotiate either a little less tension or increased strength.
A little more tension.
Or more tension.
Right. So neural, I like the whole negotiating with the nervous system or just neural input,
right.
Just a stimulus of some sort. But
I still prescribe foam rolling.
Same. I haven't done it as much, but I guess I'm very short with my prescription of it in terms of, because I think when people think of foam rolling, especially a very active crew, they think more is better.
Right.
So like, it was foam rolling for like an hour, and I'm like, oh,
no,
that's yeah.
That's
I mean,
long.
Imagine someone doing a deep tissue massage in one area for an hour. How would that feel? So you could. I don't want to say damage, but you could irritate an already irritable tissue.
Definitely.
With foam rolling. And then there's vibrating foam rollers. There's a rumble roller.
Mm-hmm. Dude, there's lots of vibrating things now. It's crazy. At the gym that I work at and at one of the clinics that I'm at, they have it's the Hyper Ice vibrating foam roller.
I've seen it. Yep.
And then there's, I don't know if it's Hyper Ice, but it looks like a really large softball. and it vibrates
yes,
too.
I've seen that one.
So I tried that one in particular, and I can't stay on it for too long because I did it on my thoracic spine, and it started to make my like jaw shake back and forth and my head rattle. So I don't know if I had it turned up too high or what, but
So neural input. I mean, again, you could be ramping things up in a way that you may not like. But it's pretty interesting, the tools and stuff that, I mean, I want to say 10 years ago, let's say 15 years ago, there was a soft foam roller and like a high density hard foam roller. And, people used to use the soft foam roller and they kind of upgraded. And those are like extinct now. You won't see a soft foam roller, but you will see hard or rumble roller, which is like these spikes.
Oh, Jesus, yeah, that's
it actually
crazy.
feels pretty good in the legs. But it's just amazing how things have evolved. Now, moving into these tools.
Yeah.
So Graston, I've seen mixed results, at least just through observation, where certain patients seem to be in a lot of discomfort. And my personal belief is the tactile feedback from manual therapy and feeling your patient's tension or even their withdrawal from some of the techniques you're using. I think some of that could be lost with an instrument. That's just my personal belief. There's a certain level of connection when you're performing manual therapy that there's a lot of factors that we don't know. Obviously, we just discuss it all the time. But I think that the instrument may be a barrier at times. I don't know enough about it. I'll let Lee elaborate a little on Graston.
I don't.
Now he's the expert.
I wish no. I agree with you. I feel like you'll lose a lot of that connection with the patient if you're having a manual therapy session and you choose to use one of these tools, only because you don't necessarily have any contact with them. And like Eric said, you don't feel how either they're retracting from it or they're tensing up or you're monitoring the breathing, things like that. So those are important aspects of manual therapy. And as we, a lot of people who I've met on the outside of this podcast, they have reached out and basically are like, well, if you don't believe in manual therapy, then what do you believe? Well, I still believe in manual therapy, but I don't believe it for the reasons that they're originally were thought to be causing a change in the body. I think that connection, when you start to put your hands on people and you start to palpate things and, quote, treat certain tissues and joints, then you're affecting the conscious and the subconscious part of that person. You're affecting all levels. And there's so many layers to everybody's condition. And those layers might not be addressed by a conversation, might not be addressed by education. It might need to be addressed by actually having them feel different temporarily. And I have read some posts online that a lot of people are against that, which I find interesting. But you can always educate people afterwards why they feel better, and then you can continue that. My experience so far in the last year implementing pain science principles along with manual therapy have been way improved in terms of my outcomes, only because I have found when I start doing these things immediately from the first session and educate them about what they can handle in terms of pain science, and in addition giving them manual therapy and then also educating them on principles that might be affecting why we're doing manual therapy, things like that, they'll need less manual therapy as time goes on, because now you've already given that information on the first session, even though they feel good, and they come back and then they're going to have a realization. They're like, well, I felt good because of what they said rather than my actual tissues changing and things like that. So that's why I think these things are have to be done in conjunction. And then when you implement things like the tools, it can not only lose the connection with the patient, but it can sometimes confuse them, because you're using something that the principle is supposed to be like you're breaking up scar tissue, you're moving fascia and muscles and things like that. But it's really, the research is very weak on that, and the logistics behind that are very weak based on what we know about certain tissues like the IT band.
Yeah, and I mean, look, these tools, as Lee was mentioning, I would think have an effect on the nervous system very similar to manual therapy.
Right.
So, if it's helping your patients and, it's not hurting your patients and it's helping, as we discussed last podcast, the more tools, the merrier, and to be able to be able to pull out this Graston tool on the right person would be key. I mean, as Lee mentioned, I think the reason, I mean, I do very similar techniques as I did X years ago, but the reasoning I think is a lot different. The way I describe it to patients about, oh, now I feel better. What did you do? I don't know what you did. And I was like, well, think of it as us providing a window to move a little differently, to feel a little different, to feel maybe a little less tension in an area. But at the end of the day, it's going to be, you're going to, your body will self-regulate if
Right.
given the right opportunity. And I think manual therapy is a great tool to use to kind of open that window. In a lot of cases, having an education, a pain science kind of education with the patient, teaching them an exercise or exercises, often that pattern is really ingrained, and it takes a little more to, if I can say, unlock a certain pattern.
Yeah. And I would like to use one of the more famous pain science therapists out there, Diane Jacobs, as an example. So Diane Jacobs, she's a Canadian physical therapist. And I have not taken her course, Neuromodulation, but I have read pieces of her book. And one of our colleagues, Patrick Lyon, went through her whole course and did an in-service back at the clinic. And we got to see it firsthand after that. And I've read a lot of her stuff. She's got a great blog, very in-depth. I think I mentioned this before. She reads very intense neuroscience. She's kind of on the neuroscience part of it in the sense that she goes into cellular makeup and a little bit of philosophy too about our consciousness. But what she does treatment-wise, if you're not familiar with it, dermoneuromodulation is basically addressing the skin and just changing how some of the receptors in the skin respond to stimuli. So, primarily this is for chronic pain patients who have most likely have failed other interventions and stuff like that. But you can see how when you do that, she's still a quote hands-on method because she's doing the evaluations and she's assessing their movements and assessing how they feel when she palpates, and then applies this neuromodulation, and then has success. And so what that success that she hypothesizes is coming from is that changing that neural in and output. So now instead of having this feedback that this patient might have where this painful stimulus kind of bouncing back and forth between the brain and the tissues, she's now providing a novel stimulus to that area that's not causing discomfort, nor is it, quote, causing something that would be considered a threat, but something that's new. And then that changes the makeup of the receptors. So we have so many receptors in our skin, the most in our skin, and they sense pressure, muscle length, tissue length, temperature, all these things in our blood, things like that. So by affecting all these things, you can change feedback quite a bit. So that, I think, I think that's what, when we talk about these tools, when you do it to a certain extent, not to the point where people are like almost bloodied and bruised up, which I've seen awful pictures of.
Yes, I've seen it.
I think if you do a little softer, you can kind of achieve what she's doing, which is change the input-output around the skin.
Right, and I think the courses go around being able to first they probably go over the guideline, their guidelines, but when to kind of what tool to use in what area, depending on how accessible that tissue is. I've seen it used on like Achilles and hip. I mean, I've seen it used across the board, neck, different tools for different parts of the body. But that neuromodulation, I mean, I've been on the other side of that. Patrick, I remember, treated me for quite some time, and it's pretty amazing how seemingly he wasn't doing much.
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
within minutes, my restrictions, I'll use myself as an example. He was treating my neck for a pretty significant radiculopathy where I had some numbness, tingling, pain in my neck after a fall. I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks into it, he had me in like a sustained mobilization, really gentle. We were chatting, yada, yada, yada. Before you know it, I felt something kind of relax in my neck, and immediately I had more range of motion, less pain in my neck. So again, I don't know exactly what happened, but I am a believer in what he was attempting to Well, not attempting. What the treatment techniques he used. He also had a grip. What was that grip thing?
Dysum.
Dysum. So he was using that, which was pretty interesting. And again, to this, unfortunately, we're not surrounded by this level of practitioner. But
Not anymore.
Pat, wherever you are,
We learned a lot from you, mate, and you've changed our lives.
Yeah. He did
forever.
A lot. He did a lot of goodness.
Man.
But, so Graston's one of those.
Yeah, Graston's smart tool, and I think there's some other ones out there. But those are when I did a quick Google search, those are the two most popular ones. ART courses. That was another thing Dr. Seda wanted us to touch on. ART stands for Active Release Technique. It's for a little history of it, it was originally created by a chiropractor, I believe. And it is very popular in a sense in the chiropractic world and some in the PT world. I know a lot of PTs who go through the courses. Now, there's a caveat. These aren't just courses you go and take and pay for and say you're an ART practitioner. When you go and take these courses, for you to remain an ART practitioner, you have to go back and do it again to a lesser extent, apparently, after several years. And so you have to pay a good amount of money. So the initial payments are pretty high. So there's three sections, three main ones. There's upper extremity, lower extremity, and spine. And then I didn't know this, but they had a full body week course that you could take, which is like, I mean, I don't know.
Shebang.
That's I don't know. As a continuing ed course, to take in all that information and at one time, I think that's a little much.
Yeah, so it's a 7-day course, and it's about $5,100. So
Woo, it's
a lot. I mean,
expensive.
what we know and how the adult learner, consumes information. I mean, an hour at best.
10 minutes. 10 minutes, man. Apparently, after 10 minutes, we're stretching.
Yeah, like after 2 minutes, I start to lose my focus.
I think nowadays it's gone less. When we were in school, we learned about this stuff, and we had an incredible teacher, Dr. Driscoll, who taught us this stuff. I think I might be wrong. Was it 20 minutes or 10 minutes where you start to kind of fizzle out?
I think it was 20, but I mean,
Okay.
over an hour. I think it was just at an hour, like
You need
a
a
class
break.
length. Just about 45 minutes to an hour attention span. And they really based a lot of our class breaks on that.
Yeah,
amongst other stuff.
which was pretty cool.
It was like, all right, you guys had enough. But back to Lee's point, 7 days, full body, releasing everything, earlobes, nose. There's a technique for everything. But I personally have like kind of bastardized, I think, some ART. I mean, I think
Same here.
hybrid, work on a point while the person's moving through a range, and I use contract, relax, and sustained hold. I think as time goes on and after X amount of courses, you start finding your own way and combining different systems. I mean, I know some people don't agree with that, but Lee and I do. And most importantly, it kind of matches what I'm trying to accomplish with the person in front of me.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
the ART, the concept behind it, I'll let Lee elaborate a bit. What do you like? Lee's
I'm
the
the
expert.
expert.
He's an
I'm
expert of
definitely
it.
not the expert.
He just read like 10 minutes in Google. He
It
made
was
sure he
right
didn't
before this.
overwhelm himself, and then he got on and he's like, "Now I know." So ART.
I'm on Google right now, just reading verbatim. No, ART stands for Active Release Technique, and basically it's like a pin and stretch. That's the most simplest thing that I understand that it is, and everybody who's probably ART certified is probably like breaking their phone right now. Like, he's crazy. No, but basically an example would be, let's say if you wanted to release the subscapularis muscle, and that's a muscle, that's one of our rotator cuff muscles, and to palpate it, we have to go into the armpit and kind of get on the front of the scapula. And so if you have someone laying down and then you got one hand dug into that muscle and you kind of pin down, quote, a tender spot, and then you're going to range that person into where they can't go anymore, which would be over their head, or they feel like they are restricted by what you're palpating. Then you're going to have them actively go into that range, go back and forth while you pin it down. So that is, again, I think something like that, you're not necessarily changing absolute tissue length, but you're going to change how the nervous system is understanding that length. So maybe this person had only been used to raising their arm a certain height for their entire life, and they can't go higher than that because they, quote, have stiff tissues, but it might just be their nervous system has just adjusted to that position. So when you do something like this, which is pretty aggressive and it can sometimes be very painful, you're going to provide a lot of new stimuli that's going to, quote, loosen things up and open up that area.
Yeah, and I think of it as a reset, or reset, almost like you're flooding the receptors to confuse. I think it causes a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
But in some cases, that confusion helps expand people's boundaries. I mean, so that's a great example because I definitely use it
That one,
that
yeah,
way. I use
still
that,
use
yeah.
that. Oh
I'll
my
have
God,
them
yeah.
go through a PNF pattern
Yeah.
while I'm in there, and
They'll do it
while I'm there, I'm
That's tough.
digging in, or even this guy.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a great technique, but I think active release, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool, and use it.
So yeah, they have the full body course, 7 days, $5,100. If you just do the upper extremity course, level 1, $2,190. That's 3 days. Lower extremity course, $2,190, 3 days. The spine, it's a little less for some reason, $1,790 for 3 days. These are high prices. So like, if you were to take a PT course, I'm thinking IPA, Institute of Physical Art, because they're usually 3 days, maybe 3.5.
Yeah.
That's like $700, $900.
Even if it's a 2-day course, it's probably like, I don't know, anywhere from 6 and change to maybe 8.
Right.
So it's pricey. I would say that ART's been around for a while, so
Very long time. It's very interesting to me.
yeah. So the fact that it's been around, one of the least favorite words, interesting. The fact that it's been around.
I can't even. I'm trying to cut that off. I'm trying to find.
I was listening
the
to
vocabulary.
another podcast, and Mr. Jocko was talking about he was like, I say dichotomy way too much, and I could, yeah. He says it a lot. It's in his book. But anyway, I think doing this podcast, you hear yourself talking, you're like, wow, I sound ridiculous.
It's true. I guess this is good. Some self-reflection.
A lot of too much self-reflection. Hours.
Oh shit!
But
I do have to mention this is around the time where we start mentioning other podcasts. I do have to mention
Jocko, Joe Rogan, anything else?
Tim Ferriss.
Oh, there we go.
He's a very famous podcaster. A guy that we had on here, Elliot Lindy, a former patient of both of ours, he reached out to me and he reminded me, he was listening to Tim Ferriss, the time in 2015 where Tim Ferriss had Pavel Sastolun. Oh God, I hope I got that name right. His last name right. But Pavel is the one credited to bringing the kettlebell over from Russia, and he's still around. He's still running the Strong First organization. But Elliot was really impressed by this podcast, and I had listened to it back in 2015, but I re-listened to it now, and I'm blown away by it because all the information he has in there was in terms of like exercise science, muscle physiology, and programming. Just like Tim Ferriss said on the podcast, he's like, you have so much clarity in this stuff, and it just changes the way you think. And it's true. He's just I think why he's so clear about it and the way he talks about it the way he does is because he saw it right in front of him work, and he worked in Russia for a very long time applying this stuff, and he did it with his clients, did it with the special forces. And
yeah, he used to be he used to be part of an elite force similar to the Navy SEALs in Russia. And then made his way. I think he trained with a lot of Navy SEALs also. I mean, some of the people higher up in his organization.
Let me see. I'll just type in Russian special.
Lee's getting flagged right now.
I know, right? Ooh, why are you Googling Russia? Here, that's it, right there. Spetsnaz.
Yeah.
He trained these individuals. I think they're one of the higher special forces in the world.
Wow.
Which is so cool. And if you want to get really inspired to do kettlebell stuff, just Google Pavel in special forces, and usually he comes up.
The Tim Ferriss podcast is. I think it's
awesome.
It's easy listening,
Mm-hmm.
and you just see how serious this gentleman is. But just some philosophical points of running should be relaxing. I mean, he gets into that, right?
Yeah, well, I remember what I heard in the last part of it was like, It should not be a workout. The workout itself means nothing. It should be a practice every time, and it should be an enjoyable practice. You're learning about the movement, and you're practicing the
Oh,
movement.
but I hope this guy
And-
likes your accent, dude. You're gonna have this guy in your bedroom with a black suit on, like you make fun of me.
Lee, this is not funny, Lee. This is
No, but he really, I mean, Lee put me on to kettlebell training in himself. And when I listened, I guess I listened to this before I got involved, and just at the same time that I think Lee's sister gave a seminar, and it just made sense, and it was very simple, and it goes against a lot of current concepts in fitness, which is, work till you want to drop or you want to throw up. It's a very different methodology where you're working at 70% of your effort, probably 90 to 95% of the time.
Exactly. He explained the physiology behind it, and I do remember learning this stuff both from listening to him, going to the Strong First certification, and then from school. But to hear him say it, there's way more clarity and simpleness to it, or simplicity, whatever. He talks about what's happening when you feel that burn in the muscle, and he's like, you don't ever want to feel that unless you're doing this program, and he explains the program. And there's a very specific reason for everything. And he's like, we don't know everything in terms of what's happening, but these are the things that we do know. And they've figured these things have been figured out empirically because they've had to do trial and error for years and years and years. And I didn't know this, but the records that most of the Russian athletes broke in the 80s are still held.
Yes.
Because of their strength conditioning program?
Yes. I mean, it's controversial from what we know now,
Yes,
but
he
at the
talked
same,
about that a little bit.
but at the same token, as controversial as it is, and we'll, elephant out of the room, the steroid usage that may have been used was kind of happening across the board. So,
Right.
yeah, but I think as a methodology of training, this kind of leads us somewhat into our next topic down the road. But never being sore, like for instance, kettlebell training, the idea of going at 70%, often you may not get sore after adapting to this kind of training.
Right.
And I think the consideration to be made is the people he was training had to be ready at a moment's notice, and they can't have sore quads when they're on a mission, on a 2 or 3 day mission in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, it goes to the population that he's worked with, which is, it's military. And I think it goes into why I think it's so popular here and amongst law enforcement and military. It's for that reason.
Definitely. And also our favorite athletes to talk about are combat athletes.
Correct. And they're using a lot of it.
Yeah. and I think that's the primary, that should be the primary mode of exercise for them. So kind of to tap into our next thing is like considerations for different athletes. And you want to break it down by many different things, and one of which is their demands. It can be energy demands. It can be movement demands. So let's say a combat athlete, very high energy demands, very high explosive demands. So those things can be trained with kettlebell training over and over again.
And then it goes back into working with kettlebells, not getting as sore, being able to train, spar.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So being able to do kettlebell workout and then do your regular training, which would be the sparring or whatever it may be that day, that's super important. So one of the things that have helped me along as a strength conditioning person and a trainer over the years is breaking down sports by planes of movement. So, everyone can look at it differently, but you can identify like primary, secondary, and tertiary movement planes. So, like, let's say a simple sport like baseball. What are the primary planes of movement that they need to be pretty strong in?
Frontal, transverse, sagittal. I mean, just the good old humdrum plane. What you've learned.
1, 2, 3.
The 1, 2, 3 for sure. I would think.
Yeah, I would put the primary at transverse. So if you want to think of like
throwing, running,
running, swinging, and then they got to run, so sagittal plane. But I think they're going to need a little bit more. There's less familiarity of the muscles to be strong in like whipping a 90 mile 90-mile-per-hour fastball or throwing from center field to home plate or something like that. Like,
Right.
you got to really train for that. Versus where they walk, they're going to be able to run. They can train that strength to run, but they're already kind of familiar with that movement. So I would put the primary one at transverse, and then I would put secondary at sagittal, and then tertiary at frontal. But yeah, so you want, and then you want to think about, all right, you identify the primary movement planes. Then what are the energy systems that they have to use? Are they going to be like throwing 80 balls in a row? No, they're going to throw like one ball at a time, and each inning's not going to be, they're usually like 10-second bursts. So they're going to use like one of the shortest energy systems that you can, like creatine phosphate system. So you want to train, you're not going to train them like you would someone who has an endurance.
Soccer athlete.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to primarily be doing a lot of lifting. They should be doing mainly some explosive stuff. They don't have to do like snatches and cleans, but they can work through basic things like kettlebell swings, cleans, stuff like that, which are a little bit less demanding on the whole body and skill than it is for like a barbell.
A lot of stop-start, I would say, being able to turn on and off. And there's a whole lot of waiting, so I think, a baseball athlete would be, using that as an example, being able to stay mobile during the game. I mean, you see these pro athletes constantly warming up, but often you see them just kind of chilling out. I mean, and who am I to say I don't know what the level, I don't know what they've done. I'm watching one little clip of it, but yeah, being able to kind of stay engaged. Reaction's another, the level of high react. They definitely have to work on their reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting you say about keeping moving, because I've gotten a lot of patients who are not very athletically inclined, or they just don't know a lot about sports, and they would joke about baseball, how like they're always pulling something and they don't really do much. And I'm like, look, these guys are extremely explosive athletes. They can run off the line real fast, and they can hit a ball really hard. They can throw and swing really hard. And like you said, they're waiting around a lot. So that, imagine having to explode, and then you basically are just static for God knows how long, up to 3 minutes at a time, and you have to stay loose, and they're not always going to be able to do that. So Pavel actually talked about that, like the fast and loose stuff. You know about that, right?
Yes. And then he's always shaking in between.
Yeah, I didn't know the exact science behind it, but he talked about it. It's about like getting rid of the hydrogen ions that build up during muscle contraction, and those hydrogen ions can they can be toxic for your muscles if they build up too much. And he says when you build up a sufficient amount of hydrogen ions, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, then that's when stuff like the burn comes in the muscles, and it could be somewhat toxic for the whole system. So the whole shaking out, one of the protocols he talked about was through another sports scientist over in Russia, and I can't remember his name, but he was talking about training type 1 muscle fibers, and after each set, because it's like a super slow set that you do for like 30 to 60 seconds, then maybe even longer than that. Each set, you have to rest for 5 to 10 minutes. But during that 5 to 10 minutes, you're just basically doing fast and loose the whole time.
Shaking around. I recall listening to that, and intuitively, I remember like hopping before sets of squats or something. Kind of, I don't know, almost to ramp myself up.
Stimulate
nervous system, jump around, but that just shaking it out kind of thing. I mean, it's pretty interesting to hear the science, because when you think of the burn, I think everybody thinks of lactic acid.
And that's
right?
incorrect.
That is very incorrect. I mean,
that's incorrect.
There is
no
lactate threshold, or yeah.
Well, it's not. I don't. They went into it in the podcast, and I've heard this before, and I learned it myself. It's not the actual, like they were not identify. They cannot identify the fact that even though you have a byproduct of lactate, or I guess lactic acid, that's not what's actually stimulating that sensation of burning. The hydrogen ions apparently are more likely to cause that burning because of the change in the chemistry in your blood.
All right, that's crazy.
So and that stuff is so cool. And if you I took, when I was a kinesiology major in undergrad and I had an exercise phys class, there's so much more stuff out there that we don't learn about on a regular basis because we're not like exercise physiology PhDs. But I think that stuff is fascinating, because if you start to be able to manipulate all the performance levels and things like that, you're gonna have a lot of efficient athletes out there.
Oh, for sure. I
You
think
know.
we're living in really interesting times where a lot of this new science is being applied,
Mm-hmm.
and different modalities. I think 20. I think it's talking about this with someone else about like college football, high school football, and like we learned to squat, bench,
Mm-hmm.
squat, bench. I mean,
It's just
deadlift. I mean, I don't know. It was so weird that the weight room reflecting on it. It was, two people spotting you, get your hips back, bar to chest. It was very, and again, obviously each program, each school varies.
Yeah.
But things have come a long way in terms of how we go about that.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, I mean,
It's changing.
it's changing quickly.
It is.
So, what the hell? Energy systems, past. So considerations. So we're using baseball as an example, and we're tying in Pavel's methodology.
Mm-hmm.
But considerations, planes of movement, season-based. That's another one that Lee has a bullet on. A lot of pro athletes, at least my experience, some of them in the off season really go off the rails.
Oh my God!
Off
yeah.
the rails, and either
That's a
they
big
gain a
mistake.
lot of weight or they just become deconditioned.
Right.
And I guess at 22 or 25, they can get back on the horse quite easily. But yeah, it's something to consider when training. I see, where I'm at, Velocity Performance. There's a lot of pro athletes that are training off season. That I think football athletes, track athletes, and you could hear them talk and say, "Hey, I wasn't that bad. I'm all right." Or
When
I'm
they
ready.
come
I'm
back?
ready. Yeah, when they come back, I'm ready. I'm ready. Oh, I gained 15 pounds, and you see the trainers shake their head. The interesting thing is in 2 or 3 weeks, you can see these people transform.
Sure.
It's pretty amazing to see in action. But yeah, season makes a difference in terms of how you're going to ramp up their program.
Yeah, and it's funny because the course that I went to, the Juggernaut Performance Summit, they talked about this specifically, and I think I mentioned that study where they were able to put a number on the kind of hitting. How long did you take a break from this movement, and then where that injury happened, and where you would need to stay for that injury not to occur again. They were able to calculate that number. So I can't remember the exact percentage, but you were supposed to maintain, I think it was around 30% of what you normally could do, even on the quote rest time. So you could use your repetition maximum for that. You could use mileage. You could use intensity levels or whatever sport you're doing. But it's a great little. I'll post it in the show notes, I guess.
There you go. More research.
No, I mean it should be easy to find. That was in the PowerPoint at the course. And yeah, and that makes sense to me where you keep moving, but you're not stressing the fuck out the whole time. Like you're not trying to PR on a brand new movement that you're trying to do. So that's another thing too I wanted to touch on is like, let's say you have a professional athlete. We're going to go to the extreme. Professional baseball athlete. They're in the off season and they are not, and this is common too, they're not familiar with like power movements,
Right.
clean, jerk, snatch. You think you should teach them how to do a power movement on the off season?
No,
Not really.
No, I mean, look, and what's the carryover? I mean, that's
Right.
another very debatable fact. Like the whole concept of we've kind of lived through functional training, which is kind of it should all be functional, right? But yeah, the carryover on a power clean to someone's pitching ability is probably pretty poor.
Yeah.
And the risk of teaching a pro athlete who has already a desirable movement pattern for their sport. You're now going to try to get them to acquire a skill, and the question is why.
The introduction to that kind of a complex skill can take years sometimes.
Yeah,
So-
and that's with training. That's with someone watching. If you want to pick up powerlifting on your own, it's going to be pretty tough to be able to self-manage that, even with videos. Yeah, you'd have a needed to train die, but yeah, that again, that specificity of movement, and as Lee just said, planes of movement. When is this baseball player going to have to snatch 225 over their head? Probably not.
No.
So we have planes of movement. We have seasons to consider. The person's obvious past history, but Now we go into their past or current injury situation.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the biggest things. I think one of the main things that we can learn from all this pain science is that we're now finding out that there is bigger stuff going on than just a pathomechanical change. So meaning like, you look at lower back pain and the research on that and athletes and even there's a great study. Oh God, I'm almost hesitant to mention it because I'm put it in the show notes, but I'll put it in the show notes.
This is the third show note.
I know. I got. Oh God, but there was a recent ACL return to sports study, and they found that actually I sent this to a colleague of mine, so I'll be able to find it. They found that fear had way more to do with their successful return to sport than all of the other markers like hop tests, range of motion, quad strength, things like that. And I am totally on board with that in the sense that if you have an athlete who has an injury, they rehabbed it and they recovered, and you're trying to get them back to their sport, that's probably one of the first things that has to be addressed is, okay, they have to have a sit down and be like, all right, well, what's the biggest thing preventing you from going back into the sport? And I'm worried about injuring it again. They're worried about actually doing well, whatever it may be. Well, they should have a little conversation about where they stand functionally, and then addressing those worries by practical means. So strength, endurance, everything.
This is a common. For the physical therapists out there, we could all kind of relate, or hopefully relate, to, I'll use an amateur runner, has a calf tear, worried about returning to running, playing tennis, recreational tennis, running. Well, I'm not sure, I don't know, I don't want to re-injure it. So we got to, like Lee said, kind of challenge that. As therapists, one of the little method what I would use is like, well, what makes you think that you're going to re-tear it? Well, sometimes it's still tight. All right, let's check this out. You've been hopping. You told me yesterday you ran for the light.
That's a big thing in New York, actually.
Yeah, basically evidence to kind of dispel that. Now, is there a risk of you tearing your calf again? There's always a risk, but it's the same risk you had prior to this injury.
Right.
So again, challenging their belief and challenging their fear is definitely part getting, whether it's an athlete, amateur or professional.
And you have to challenge that fear as aggressive as possible. You have to tell them that they're...
Yes. I mean, you should tell them. You should make them jump in front of you, like, run now.
I was just joking.
No, but you obviously you got to tailor to your audience, but really what as therapists, that's a daily question we get. Am I ready? Am I, and it's a gray area. No one really knows. But objectively, all of the signs and symptoms that were kind of teased out during an evaluation after this person, let's say, tore their calf, there should be some objective changes that you could point to so the patient knows, has some evidence. And most importantly, the buildup. So this person used to be a marathon runner. They haven't ran more than a mile or two, starting slow. I mean, I'm going to give an amateur runner that wants to run a marathon a run walk. Well, that's easy. I don't feel like I'm working out. Great. Great. Just let it be evidence so that, you sleep on it. The next time you run, you're now not as tense. Because I think a lot of people do re-injure because of this fear and this guarding pattern that exists. And that guarding pattern interrupts, efficient movement. So
exactly.
So yeah, you just that's a huge consideration with training any athlete, whether it's amateur or professional.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be going through this next week.
Wow. Lee's coming out of retirement.
I'll be returning to jiu-jitsu next week, and it's been since the end of June.
I actually thought of it.
And I was messing around with my girlfriend the other night, and because she does jiu-jitsu too, and so I was just trying to do a little guard play, and she rolled me a little bit more into my neck, and I immediately, the initial thought was like, oh shit, I gotta not injure my neck. I was like, oh, I feel fine though, this is fine, and I got up afterwards and I was fine. But I will be going through this, and I'm gonna attempt to use the same methods as I would a patient, and I'm going to ask for, colleagues' helps and stuff like that. And so, but these are things that have to be considered. And I addressed this from day one. So like how I mentally dealt with it is I think I went to the whole story through previous podcasts, but I went to the office at the school and I froze my account for longer than I thought I would have to. And that just got it out of my head for now, so I didn't have to worry about, there's a too early timeline to go back. So now I gave myself enough room. I've been improving. Today, actually, I got up for the first time. I didn't post it. I'm not going to post it, but I'll talk about it here. I got up to 24 kilo 4 times on a floor press.
Wow.
I couldn't even get up. I think I told this. I couldn't even get up at 12 kilo once on the floor press when this initially happened. And so I felt really hopeful today. I felt really good. And it's obviously significantly weaker to the right, but it's definitely better. And the improvement is pretty quick. So
pretty cool testament in the body healing. I mean, initially, when you have neurological weakness, it's a really scary thing. Numbness and tingling.
And that contraction in my tricep, I had like the squishy tricep. And now it's like, I can actually poke on it, and it's hard. It's
good
crazy
stuff, man. The body heals. The body heals if given the right. Lee gave it the right opportunity. I think if he continued to train and stress his already stressed body, it might have not turned out that way.
No, and I think I would have injured some other things, maybe my shoulder, my elbow, because when I started to do some basic lifting initially, my elbow did not feel stable. I was like, this is really weird. So imagine getting arm barred with that kind of lack of strength. I would have been screwed.
And they would have done it.
Yeah, I went right for it. So we touched on some considerations today, some tools, and we went over some other things about age. And it wasn't just my age that delayed my healing. That's another thing too I hear all the time. I'm sure you do too. But is this because I'm getting older?
No, I just had this conversation with my 81-year-old client, and how you hear from a lot of, I would consider younger individuals, how, is this just because I'm aging? Obviously, things do change as we age.
Yeah.
But having that mindset often is a limiting mindset. And my 81-year-old guy, he gets up, he has his movement practice, he does a little mobility in the morning. I see him about twice a week. He gets to the gym another day. But daily he works out, very regimented with his sleep, has a very busy social calendar. I mean, he goes to shows and plays, and it's pretty inspiring. But when you mention age to him, he doesn't. Again, he comes from a different generation. Mm-hmm. But I have met 25-year-olds say, "Hey, my knee's hurting because I'm getting older," and I'm like, "Wait a minute, No, it's not.
No, you're 25.
You're right. And even 40, and I caught myself the last couple of weeks. I'm going to self-disclose something. When I was working with some partners at Henzo's, I would be like, yeah, man, I said something to the effect of, yeah, as an old man. And I saw my partner look at me like, old man, you're still coming at me, old man. You're not laying down. So I even myself put that, and I said, why am I even saying that,
I think it's natural to do that though, like because we all feel it. We feel it, and then This is why we need checks and balances. Jocko talks about this all the time. Don't let your emotions just run, out of control in your head. You have to have some checks, and I think it's 1,000% human to be like, oh, I know I'm older. This, you say things like that, and I say things like that too. But keep in mind, be like, well, actually, I'm doing pretty good for this age, and I can do this, and this. And not letting that emotion eat away to everything else, and saying that that's the primary reason either for injury or energy. And I think that's a big mistake our medical community can do, because I've heard this so many times before where people come back from the doctors and be like, oh, he told me that this just happened because I'm old. Like, that's the primary reason. No, it's not the primary reason.
No, it's what about, did he ask you about your diet? Did he ask you about your sleep? Did he ask you about your movement history?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's and we know that through research now, how, those individuals that do have a movement practice in their life, their quote aging process in some respects is seemed to have been mitigated somehow. I mean, obviously, exercise can be considered like the fountain of youth to some extent.
100%.
Especially with endurance athletes and brain development or brain degeneration, I guess. Getting that oxygen in, but again, not just patching it up and saying, "Hey, this is because I'm quote old." A lot of the pathoanatomical stuff that we could point to, a lot of the MRI readings,
the gray hair on the inside.
The degeneration that happens after you're 22.
That's right.
I wish, and we've gone over this countless times. I wish that the language could change and
I think it will. I think it's becoming more exposed.
age. I have seen an MRI, to be fair, say age-related changes.
Really?
Which age-related changes sounds better than degenerative.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
negative connotations with that.
In that podcast that Pablo was on, do you remember what he talked about with his father?
No.
Oh my God, that's where I ended just now. Is that Pavel talked about his father starting powerlifting at 70, and
Amazing.
at 78 he pulled off the ground 405.
That's amazing.
And he won apparently some competition for his age group, of course, 78 years old. But people may be like, well, he's got certain genetics that make him superhuman. Well, guess what? He still breathes oxygen, and he still looks out of two eyes, walks on two legs, and he's a human being. And so that gives some potential about what our bodies are capable of. Genetics are going to determine certain checks and balances here and there, and recovery and quickness and adaptation and stuff like that. But in terms of the overall achievement, that's going to be about the work. That's going to be about the consistency. That's going to be about your sleep, your diet, all this stuff. So
yeah, and I always tell this. I mean, I think a large part of the group that I've worked with for years within training world have been individuals that don't have much of an exercise background, and I'm their introduction to working out or becoming more consistent with their workouts. And I've seen strength gains, body comp changes in individuals across the spectrum. So this 80-year-old gentleman that I'm discussing, I met him at 67, and he couldn't even do a push-up. And at this point, recently, I think he knocks out like 21 push-ups, and
wow,
he's squatting, and he's does little assisted pull-ups. I mean, it's pretty amazing that at any age one could make gains.
Yeah.
Obviously there's going to be a level of limitation, but that limitation is often self-created.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the body will continue to adapt as long as you provide some stimuli to it, and just keep going. All right. So I think this is going to wrap it up, unless you had any other. No.
This is we'll just announce that we have some exciting guests coming.
That's right. We're gonna have a round table, man. I mean, I can't wait. It's gonna be good.
So we'll have
get your popcorn.
Yeah, we'll have some cool people coming on, and stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you for listening and downloading all the great feedback. Appreciate it. All right.
Signing off.
Thank you for listening to A Few Good Physios. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Follow us each week while we interview guests and have clinical commentary.